Good morning, everybody. We'll just get started in a moment. Okay, so good morning and thank you for joining us this morning where we're going to be talking about meeting your supporters where they are, how Epilepsy Action grew engagement through data. Bit of a mouthful for this morning, and obviously delighted to be joined by Epilepsy Action and also Bluelight. So just quickly, some housekeeping. To say the session is being recorded and that will be available on demand afterwards. You'll see there's a Q&A box, so that's for any questions. Please put questions in. The gentlemen are dying to get asked many questions this morning, so put in as many as possible and we'll cover what we can. And you see there's a chat box, and that's really for any more technical or support questions that you have throughout the session. So just quickly, for those of you who don't know Hart Square, we are a consultancy practice working in the not-for-profit space. And really, we're all about, we don't sell technology, but that we help make it work. And what really does that mean? Looking at the technology change journey, everything from strategy through selection, through the implementation phase, to the realization, the reality of making it all work at the end, which is part of what the discussion that we're going to have today is. So just quickly to do introductions. So as I've been doing all the talking, I'm Joyce Harmon. I'm Head of Client Services at Hart Square. And I am delighted to be joined by a fabulous panel this morning. So Jon, if you could just quickly introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Jon. I'm the Communications and Digital Engagement Director at Epilepsy Action.
Fantastic. And we'll find out more about you shortly. And Marius.
Hello. I'm Marius Chrysanthou. I'm the Managing Director and Co-founder at Bluelight.
Fantastic. And Alan.
Good morning, Managing Director at Hart Square.
Fantastic. Okay, so Alan, over to you.
Great, thanks, Joyce. So I think just a little bit of scene setting for the webinar session this morning. What we wanted to do is really kind of just start off by sort of setting out what were the purpose of what we're trying to communicate today. And really, we all know that engaging with the right audience at the right time and with the right message is key to success. Whether you're whether a charity, looking to engage more with donors and increase your donation revenue, or you're a membership body looking to either attract or retain your members, that kind of getting the right message to the right audience is key. But these days, with so many multiple channels, there's lots of different audience fragmentation, and there's a lot of increased competition for people's time. How do you focus the limited resources you have in the most effective way? So looking at some stats, and I think we can see over here that a recent report from Salesforce Nonprofit Trends Report comparing 23 to 24, 28% of respondents saw the demand for service increase, which in some respects is great, but that puts a lot of organizations under increased strain. 26% saw the demand for, donations decrease. And so 28% saw a decrease in donations. 28% unfortunately had to let staff go. And 20% have started dipping into and using their resources, their reserves. So challenging times in the nonprofit sector. And the reason I wanted to sort of put that out there is to sort of see, well, what can you do best to respond to those challenges? So of the organizations surveyed in the same report, 25% look to deliver services in a new way, so changing what they do and how they do it. And I think to be able to do that, you really have to have good data to be able to understand how you can adapt or reframe or change your service offering to be more relevant to your users. 30% plan to strategically change the way that they increase their services and just be a bit more strategic of how they were thinking about engaging with the data and their users and their staff as well. 40% increased the use of digital channels was an ambition in terms of we're going to depend more on digital to achieve those kind of results that we need. And I think one of the key ones that we wanted to draw out today is kind of 31% thought it was important that they were more flexible and agile in terms of responding to change. And again, to be able to do that, you need to understand what the right services are and how you can adapt your service offering to be able to do that. 29% increased focus on investment in staff well-being. And I think that's an interesting one for me, is that throughout some of the reports that we're looking at, staff well-being is starting to become quite an important part of this mix because we're asking people to do more with less. And that's putting people who work in the NFP sector under a lot more pressure. And so having the ability to respond and adapt to these changes with the right tools and take that pressure away from staff is actually really an important factor too. So if we look at kind of just some further stats that kind of help illustrate what organizations can do, knowing and understanding your audience, as we've kind of said, is really important. But 72% of nonprofit leaders say that a better audience segmentation is critical to them increasing that engagement. And we all know that if you can increase the engagement, you can get your message across and you can achieve better return in terms of the things that you need to do. Looking further forward, though, 67% of organizations admit that they lack confidence in identifying who their key audiences are. And I thought that was quite a challenging stat, and that comes from the Charity Digital Skills Report from 2024. So predominantly UK focused, and so I think quite relevant to the topic of today about how you can be confident in identifying those audiences and then getting the right message through to them. 2.6 times is what people feel from the same report that data that they've seen in terms of supporters who receive tailored appeals are 2.6 times more likely to donate or to take action. So take action could be to volunteer, etc., to engage with your offering or your charity or your membership body. So I think, you know, tailored appeals, tailored messaging is really important. So how do you deliver tailored messaging, you know, in terms of being able to deliver the right data? And to be able to deliver that right message because you've got the right data. I thought this was a really great quote, and I think actually John would probably really like this quote too. This is from the guy who founded MailChimp, which is the one of the world's largest email marketing platforms. And I think this is really an important one, that the goal is to know your audience so well that when you communicate, your communications feel like a conversation and not a campaign. And I think we'll see today how Epilepsy Action have done that and been able to extract some great results from doing that with their efforts. Looking at this stat, though, these were quite concerning in terms of things that I thought was quite tricky to sort of take on board. Was that from the SAGE 2025 Nonprofit Technology Impact Report, 9% of nonprofits consider themselves highly data-driven, but 85% recognize the importance of data and accurate metrics to be able to measure whether your return on investment is going to be achieved, whether your efforts being well directed, etc. And so those two stats from the same report illustrate quite a wide gap between the understanding of what we need to do as an industry and how accurately we're able to actually do it at the moment. And then so closing this piece off before we kind of set things up for looking at our case study today, I think this quote from Arthur Conan Doyle, who's the author of the Sherlock Holmes novels, it's a really old quote, but I think it's the reason I like it is because it's so apt even in today. And it is of the highest importance, therefore, not to have useless facts, elbowing out the useful ones. And I think, again, we'll see when we talk to John a bit later about how sometimes the assumptions that you've been working to for a while can be quite misleading. Things are quite fluid, things are changing quite a lot. So being able to have real world data is really more important than ever to be able to make sure you're not working on assumptions, but you're working on insights and actual data. So that sets the scene for in terms of the importance of how you can, you know, what the objective is and how important it is to be able to perfect this in challenging times. But I think the message that we really wanted to get across is that this is not something that happens overnight. And I think we see this quite often when we're talking to clients, is that the time taken to make technology change or to implement new programs or new systems takes so long that by the time you get there, you're already expecting a lot of kind of real world benefits to materialize. For us, it's about recognizing that it is a journey and getting into this position does take time, and it's about building on the right foundation. So you do need the right systems, the right strategy, data, and I think quite key is people in place before the real insights start to flow. And again, I think when we talk to John and Marios, we'll see how their experience of coming from where they were, implementing a new CRM, and then using that data that comes from that, continually refining and adapting and being flexible, can create some really great results. So I thought it'd be really useful to take a poll.
Perfect. Thank you, Alan. So yes, bear with me while I just launch the first poll. So what we're just asking is, which of these best describe your digital engagement strategy? So we track engagement across all the channels with confidence, or we track, you know, some channels but not all of them. a lot of it's anecdotal, we don't track, but we plan to, or we're evaluating and developing a strategy. Apologies, I can't seem to talk properly. So I'm just going to let this run just for another couple of seconds. The one that's winning at the minute is that we track some channels, but not all, which I don't think is that surprising. So, okay, I'm going to end that poll and let me share the results. So yeah, I don't know if anybody's necessarily greatly surprised by this. So the winning is we track some, but not all, and then closely followed by well, 18% saying engagement through all channels with confidence. So that's reassuring to hear. And then a lot, 6% on the sort of anecdotal evidence. So I think that's really interesting. But also some people saying there's nobody saying they're not doing something. So I suppose that's positive. So I'm going to stop sharing and now really to get to the two gentlemen that we all want to hear from. So want to bring in Jon and Marius here. So I suppose firstly, Jon, can you tell us a bit about yourself, your background and Epilepsy Action?
Yeah, no problem. So I've been with Epilepsy Action for 5.5 years now. And prior to that, I worked supplier side. So I worked for digital agencies and brand agencies, helping clients to deliver projects. So this is my first client side, as we used to call it, an agency land role. We've done a lot. So I arrived 12 days before lockdown in the pandemic. We had a very traditional charity model of lots of community-based events, lots of paper-based processes. So the first year and year and a half or so was sort of replacing our face-to-face activity with online activity, redeveloping our website, and at the same time realizing that the big thing that was a problem for us was we were doing this stuff but throwing it all into a database that was 25 years old, and once we put it in there was no chance of getting it back out again. So that was why we embarked on a CRM project, and since we've done the CRM project, we've also done a brand project as well, and we are now in a much healthier position, and we're the first ever epilepsy charity to enter the YouGov top 200 charities, which we'll talk about a bit later on.
Yeah, exactly, and fantastic. So, and I'd forgotten you joined just to sort of yeah, around COVID time. So, and before we get into that a bit more, Marius, can you just tell us a little bit about yourself and your background as well?
Absolutely. Morning. I have personally been in the sector, not-for-profit sector, probably 25 years, in the guise of, I guess, a client on the client side, as an independent consultant, as part of a large corporate software house, and more latterly as setting up Bluelight around about 10 years ago. Specifically, it's concentrate on the not-for-profit sector. We're very much across the whole Microsoft ecosystem, particularly Dynamics, and also Umbraco for web. So we believe very much in sort of highly integrated, data-driven solutions. So I guess, and I guess data has always been part of our USP in terms of that's very much our history, our background, and making sure that, I guess, any implementation, any system has the right data really to drive forward the objectives of any organization.
Yeah, absolutely. Data, it's all about data. So Jon, just what, as you know, we know, and I think Alan mentioned in some of the previous slides, these projects don't happen overnight. It's all a bit of a journey. So you've kind of touched on it, but sort of what journey did you go on to get to this point where you are now?
So I'm conscious of not going into a never-ending story, so I'll try and keep it relatively brief. But when I arrived in 2020, there was a project ongoing that was in a real mess. So we'd been trying to go live for 3.5 years. We'd gone partly live with Dynamics in our helpline, but the rest of the organisation was still being run off a 25-year-old system that was a bespoke build based on Progress CRM, which, for anybody listening, is of a certain age, they might remember that name, but it's not been used for anybody who's perhaps started a career post 2010. It was very, very, very old, and had been put together by somebody who wasn't actually a software developer by background. They'd learned that skill on the job with us. So there was some very interesting things in terms of the implementation. Because that project had sort of started and stalled and not really gone anywhere, when I arrived, I was really keen to get my hands on it because I could just see it was, going back to Alan's point about culture, it was an enormous hole for us in our culture. It was a project that made people not believe in what we were able to achieve. It created gallows humor. So, if you imagine people walking through corridors, sort of making remarks about the fact that this project was terrible, but nobody ever got fired for it. And it was just a signal of the inefficiency of us as a charity. But you also had people who were still beavering away, trying really hard, but without any organizational buy-in. So we needed to do a reset really urgently. We needed not just to do that because the partner and build that we had wasn't really working, but because our effort was going completely in the wrong places. So we'd spent more money propping up progress. We'd spent lots of money integrating progress with dynamics, which was costing us money on an ongoing basis and effort on an ongoing basis. So we really rapidly decided that we needed to take stock of where we were. So we did an analysis internally of where we thought the project had gone wrong and documented some of the issues around the culture of the project, the belief in the project, where we as an organization had failed rather than pointing fingers at individuals. And where also, frankly, the supplier hadn't met our expectations. So we then rubber stamped that with a piece of consultancy with Hart Square because we didn't want to bias the outcomes. So we spoke to Hart Square about auditing everybody across the organization. So they interviewed people. They found some similar things to us in terms of a lack of belief in the project, a lack of belief in the supplier, a lack of belief in us being able to, as a senior leadership team, deliver the project. So moving on from there, as the newly elected project sponsor, I was really keen that we needed to rapidly turn this project round. So when we were putting together a brief, we were determined to go live quickly because we knew that there'd been lots of talk about CRM and lots of kind of gesticulating about what it might be, but actually we needed to get people on the tools and starting to learn. So we went through a supplier process with Hart Square. We interviewed lots of different types of vendors. And in the end, we settled on Bluelight because for us, we really wanted a level of personal ownership in our projects because it was a big one for lots of people. There were lots of reputations, including mine, riding on it. So when we started talking to Marios and his team, we just felt like if the project went wrong, again, which we were hopeful it wouldn't, even if it was going wrong a little bit, that Marios and his team would feel pain and anxiety in the way that we would. And we didn't get that impression from other suppliers. So that's why we ended up going with Bluelight. And we went live in 2022, and it's been 2.5 years since. And now we're in a much better position, as I was saying earlier on.
Yeah, I mean, that's amazing. And I think that's great and interesting background of everything that you've gone through. But now that you've said that 2.5 years post go live, I want to bring in Marius. And by the way, this question is not aimed at Epilepsy Action as a more general Marius's experience, just to be clear. So Marius, do you kind of feel sometimes on clients have unrealistic expectations that as soon as the system goes live, that it's all going to work, everything is done, and it's all going to start delivering those change? Kind of what's your experience of that?
Well, always, I would say, absolutely always. Unless, of course, you're someone who's gone through this type of project, this type of system or transformation, you generally expect, well, we've done things, we've pressed the red button, where's the benefit? I guess most clients might have a small number of the team who might have gone through the process in previous projects and understand the need to have, I guess, a stable foundation before extending for further change. But a large number of the teams work with are likely not to have ever been involved in something similar. We don't expect them necessarily to be data technical process experts, but that's kind of where we come into it, to collaborate with, support, but also, more importantly, kind of paint that picture of the future and make sure that they're supported in how we get there.
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to move on to talk about, a lot more into data, sort of one of the main topics for today. So I suppose, Jon, what were kind of the biggest challenges that you faced, when trying to use the data in a strategic way? And we do have some great stats that I'm going to show up in a sec for you to talk through. But yeah, what really were sort of the biggest challenges? And I will bring up these slides as well while you're answering that.
So the big challenge we had, as this first slide shows us, is that we didn't have any real clue of how engaged our audience was. We had a bunch of different lists that had been pulled together from various people, which was really weird to me. So I've worked in digital stuff for 15 years now and more, and I'd not worked with anybody since I was a student doing a summer job where people would say, we're going to take a percentage of people from this list, percentage of people from that list, and just throw them together and sort of see what happens. You know, I'm used to much more insight than that, much more ability to tailor things than that. And this was the reality of our data when we went live with our CRM. We had no idea who was engaged with us. We had no idea who was interested in us because we didn't know at an engagement score level what they'd done. We had no idea whether the people who started to show interest with us had become more connected, and we had no real idea who our committed supporters were. In the fundraising team, in fairness, they knew who we were getting direct debits from, but that was kind of about it. You know, we didn't know much more than that, which was a real problem. And the other problem we had was that it was impossible for us to make decisions mid-campaign. So I went to an event in early 2022, I think it was, and one of the speakers there said the really important thing for all charities to be able to do, given the limited resources that they've got, is use management information to switch tactics mid-flight. We just simply couldn't do that. So the data going into the system was not fast enough, and even if it got into the system quickly, the way of visualizing that data, like you can see here, just wasn't there, so you weren't able to make decisions.
And then I suppose to show then moving on to more recent.
Yeah, so this is us now. So we've still got lots of contacts who we haven't got a known connection to, and those people we don't spend the effort on anymore, whereas previously we were treating people who only ever connected to us once the same as if they'd been our friends for 10 years. So we've now got these three different segments. So people who are interested are people with low-level engagement with us. So they might have signed up to receive emails, they might have given us a single donation, they might have shown some interest in doing an e-learning course with us, for example. The people in the connected column are people who have either done those things with higher frequency, or have done things that are more involved with us, like perhaps using a service like our helpline or our befriending or our counselling service. And then finally, the people in the committed section, these people are long-standing members, long-standing direct debit givers, regular volunteers, that sort of thing. And these are people who we know have got a really strong connection and affiliation to Epilepsy Action. And it's taken us quite a while to get to the actual shape of a pyramid. So when we first did this, as you saw, there wasn't a pyramid, there was just a really flat structure. The first time that Marios and his team ran this data for us, the really horrifying thing for me was that we had a really big top of our pyramid, a very thin middle and quite a wide base. And actually what that told us was that we didn't have anything between really heavy levels of commitment and then things that were very low level commitment. So from a comms and marketing point of view, we need to think about what the additional products were that fitted in that space. We still need more of them, as you can see here, because the ratios there are still quite skinny. But again, really useful insight for us to see our data in this way, to see where our issues are.
No, absolutely. I mean, and I love it, and thank you for sharing these, because it's good to see something actually tangible. Marius, I want to bring you in, because I know when we were just having a pre-meet, and I know that Marius, you were saying at one point you did have to sort of have the conversation with Jon to go, your data is really not in a very good state. That kind of that critical friend of going, yeah, it's not really all great. So in your experience, do organizations have a true picture of their data and its actual quality, or do you have to have a lot of those, it's not really that great conversations?
Well, it's funny, I had a quick peek actually before the webinar to the briefing note from Epilepsy Action at the time in terms of what do you feel about your data and the state and quality of it, and I think it was very confident was what we were sort of given at the time, which I mean, look, it's a very typical, it's a very normal sort of response. I mean, I guess it depends on the expertise internally. Unless you have somebody that encompasses or a team that encompasses the entire organisation in terms of data. It's always going to be a little bit slanted in terms of who's using it, who owns it, who protects it, how often is it reviewed. I mean, it's a really good example is finance data, which is deemed more important as it goes through a more, I guess, more rigorous, periodic, structured review, reconciliation, as opposed to, I guess, say, marketing sort of comms data. Obviously, there's quite a bit more compliance rigor nowadays, but I'd suggest it's probably a little bit behind more, let's say, serious data. So you may have really good data in one area because it's either reviewed more rigorously or because it's more valuable to a specific stakeholder or stakeholders, for example, donor data. And I guess it's rare that an organization will know for sure how good their data is until they put it to the test, either through a standalone exercise or usually through a new system implementation when you go, let's see what comes out the other end, and you go, oops, it's not quite as good as we thought it was, or there's gaps as to what we're trying to do with it. I mean, it's one of the main reasons why, I guess, legacy systems, once you look at them after a period of time, kind of reflect this sort of core data aspect with one or two teams kind of, keepers of the flame, whereas others have probably moved on. So you'll find that there's a huge disparity in data depending on the ownership, the importance or deemed importance, and the team looking after it.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point, isn't it? It's some teams great, so other teams not so good, but it's kind of working with the help. Jon, was the decision, made the decision to move to a new CRM? So was that the final push that was needed to say we now need to sort out our data challenges, or was it you just kind of knew you needed to do that anyway?
So we absolutely suspected that we didn't have great data. Well, I say we suspected, I suspected it. But obviously at the same time, you've got people whose roles it is to manage the data, telling you that, you sat on a pyramid full of amazing gold pieces and, really valuable things. I always suspected we had a grandparents' attic, and it was that conversation with Marios that really sort of, told us that we had data that was stuffed into random fields that was in no way appropriate. So we had financial data in plain text field as an example. So the good thing about the new CRM is it started that process of making our data more transparent, because we had so many different views in the old system because it was so customized. You'd get so far in thinking that you weren't looking at something that was particularly coherent, and then somebody would say, oh, I think I might have that data in a different view that you can't see. So moving to a modern CRM that enabled us to interrogate that data and then, frankly, look at it and go, well, actually, we need more data than this to be able to make informed decisions as a management team. That was a really good thing for us to do once we had that data available in a new system that we could actually look at.
Yeah, perfect. And just kind of one example I wanted to draw on from when we previously caught up is the Christmas campaign that you did and what you changed about that, because I thought that was really interesting. I just want to touch on that quickly.
Of course, yeah. So when we were doing appeals previously, as I mentioned, we used to sort of take a bit of a mixture of one database and another because we suspected that our sort of hot contacts were in those areas. Moving to Dynamics enabled us to use other tools, and one of those tools is Totaro, which looks at your giving history of people, looks at the demographic details, and then gives you a recommendation in terms of a kind of bell curve of who you should contact for an appeal and at what point your cost per send of a direct mail appeal starts to lead to a reduction in the amount of money that you're going to make back, with that profit you're going to make back. So we used to send our appeal to our hottest prospects. So we go after 4,000 people every year and say, here's our Christmas appeal. Please consider donating to us. Obviously, the cost of sending out 4,000 direct mail packs is not insignificant. When we put Totaro in place, the recommendation that came back from them was once we got past our top 1,000 contacts based on their ability to interrogate our data, we'd actually be reducing the profitability. So we sent to 1,000 contacts for our Christmas campaign, having put Totaro in place, and didn't see a reduction in the amount of money that we made. So our total money was up, and our profit therefore was also significantly up.
Yeah, I think it's fantastic. It's a really interesting story. Kind of moving on, talking a bit more about technology. And this question is to both of you. Come to Jon first, and then Marius, kind of your thoughts on it. So, Jon, we've previously sort of talked about, you can't build a brand. It's impossible to build a brand without a strong technical foundation. So could you just sort of expand on that a bit more, and then also kind of marries the same question to you, sort of thinking the importance of having that strong technical base in order to be able to do all of these things. So John, to you first.
Yep. So we've got a couple of different ways you can look at this. The first thing is, to build a brand, you need to have a level of authority built into that process in terms of interaction with service users across the sort of picture of different things that you do. We would not have been able to do that in our old system because we weren't able to measure engagement and tie people back to different activities. So when we did our brand refresh, we spoke to people across the piece, so service users, volunteers, fundraisers, etc., to get their feedback both at a survey level and an interview level in terms of what they think made us special. So that was the first thing. And then the second thing for us is that there's loads of really long-held assumptions within the charity sector about who charity supporters are, and those assumptions I think are really out of date. So you talk to a lot of charities and they say, oh, our typical donor, our typical supporter, our volunteer is somebody who's retired, and people who are retired don't use mobile phones. They're very reliant on post, and they like printed magazines, etc., etc. And if you build a brand with that in mind, you build a very old-fashioned brand. Whereas what we were able to do was look at our data through a new lens. So at the moment, we're running Christmas adverts for our lottery, which are going after people who typically would play lottery, who, again, charity assumption of that would be older people. And actually, we found that a good proportion of those people are people who were born in the 70s and 80s. So because of that, we've decided to go with GIF style adverts that play on things like Home Alone, Die Hard, etc. So well-known Christmas films, because we know that's got cultural resonance. So all that sort of insight allows you to have much more confidence when it comes to building a brand that transcends generations and says something genuinely interesting about your condition.
Yeah, perfect. Marius, thoughts, and any film references would be good as well.
Oh, I mean, those are my favourites. So, I mean, you've taken me already, really. I'm definitely a 70s kid. But I mean, I guess that it's easy to say that it's essential to have a proper technical base. And I guess there's probably a couple of reasons for that. I mean, I'd say it's essential, but often what happens is that lots and lots of resource and lots of people doing lots and lots of manual things get you there, kind of, but it's hard work. Having I guess, a stable technical base, it just gives everybody in the organization confidence, not just confidence that, I guess, in the system necessarily, but that their initiative that they're going to put sort of, blood, sweat and tears into it, is actually achievable. And they're not going to get to kind of the 11th hour and go, oh, it doesn't do that, or we don't have the data for that. And it just kind of gives everybody confidence to innovate, and actually push these things through without fear of a gotcha at some point or another.
Yeah, absolutely. So kind of moving into our, because by the way, we've had some great questions coming into the Q&A, so please do keep adding in your questions because we will make sure we get to them. So I suppose thinking into sort of a wrapping up and moving on. So John, looking back kind of on, where you are now and where things, the things that you would change, that how you've done things that are obvious now that you've kind of got to this stage, if that makes any sense what I just said to you.
Yeah, no problem at all. I think some of the stuff I can point to is learning of things that happened before I joined, and then I can talk about things that I've learned sort of post being involved in the project. So for me, the most difficult bit for me to unpick when I first took over project sponsorship was the way that our project had been sold into the organization, was that the technology was going to make everyone's lives easier. So basically ask for whatever you wanted to reduce your admin. And I think we've got that same problem at the moment within AI, where people are being told that AI adoption is entirely a positive thing. And I do think it is a positive thing, but it shouldn't reduce the onus on individuals to think about their own career development and things that they need. So, for example, for our previous project, one of the things that the helpline team used to hate having to do, it only happened about once or twice a year, was direct people who rang us up on Google Maps to say, where their local appointment was. So literally people would phone us up and say, I'm on this street in the middle of London. How do I get to my appointment? And we'd use Google Maps to walk around. so because that was a pain point, we decided to build an entire piece of software within our CRM to be able to enable this to happen. So you didn't have to come out of one system and go into another. But nobody thought about the fact that that was a real edge case requirement, even though it was irritating people to have to do, and also the costs of doing that. So at one point we were paying £3,000 a month to Google on locations being popped up inside of our CRM. Because whenever you open that tab, it opened up every single location that we had on a specialized Google map. So for me, I think it's really important to be honest about technology change programs and say this technology can make your job easier, but we're also relying upon you as individuals to be looking about how you can adapt your skill set and talk to your line manager about that, so that when this technology solution is in place, you can still contribute, and in fact contribute more than you were previously. So that's the first thing. And the second thing, in terms of my own involvement, as I said right at the beginning, we intentionally wanted to move at pace, and in terms of moving at that pace, the thing that we got wrong, I think, in terms of the go live was we deliberately crash landed the thing, but we probably hadn't set enough budget aside to be able to bring Marios and his team in to help us at the speed and intensity that we needed to do afterwards. So we needed to then go back to the board, get more money. And again, this was absolutely nothing to do with Marios's implementation. It was the fact that we had deliberately gone live really quickly and decided that we were going to try and iterate from that point. And if you're going to do that like we did, because that's actually quite a good way of ripping the plaster off, just make sure you've got some budget aside afterwards so you can help people stop freaking out.
No, I love that, and as I know both gentlemen from talking to me over the years, that I always say contingency is really important, because it's not a bad and dirty word in a project, it's just reality, and you should always have one. Marius, I'm going to bring you in on your sort of thoughts on everything that Jon said, but also kind of any lessons learned or thoughts or things that you would do differently or change on the project or in general.
I mean, there's always something. There's always something, and we always talk about this. Obviously, we have wash-ups after everything. I guess, was it 3 years ago? We were relatively new, I guess, specifically around some of the charity processes that we found at Epilepsy Action. We've since done a number of projects, and we try and learn from every experience. But I guess, personally, I think that the level of kind of separation, I guess, within charity sometimes, in terms of it's almost like several organizations in one, sometimes using their own tools, their own toys, their own databases, whatever. And I guess kind of we wanted to sort of bring everybody together across the journey, on the journey. We thought this would be a fantastic opportunity for everybody to work together, at the coalface, and really kind of, I guess, bring everybody together on that. But I guess we possibly should have spent a little bit more time kind of bringing the teams together before we even touched anything in terms of the project itself. I think that's probably number one for me, because I'm not going to say there's cultural divides necessarily, but there are very clear silos within charities in terms of what people are doing. And I think we probably should have spent a little bit more time on that aspect before then setting out the course. I mean, we did well in the end, but it was possibly a little bit harder than it should have been, Jon.
I would totally agree with that. I think, one of the things we talked about in the wash-up was whether, if we were doing it completely from scratch, we might do a kind of first rough and dirty agile deployment by bringing together a number of different people from within the EA team and also within the Bluelight team, just to sort of learn quickly and fail fast. And I think that the challenge in doing that within a charity is often budget, but actually I think operating in a way where you sort of force that collaboration probably is the way to go, even if it might put your costs up slightly. It'll just mean that, like, culturally this thing lands in an organization beautifully, like a gorgeous yacht rather than like an alien spaceship, which is probably how people felt at our place, because it was so different to what had existed before.
But I really also love that comment, Marius, as well, about doing a proper wash-up, because that doesn't happen in an awful lot of projects, and I think it can bring such value to be able to actually have a warts and all, what would we change, what would we do different, what we'll learn, because it's, as you said, this project hasn't finished. This is, there's many more things, to continue to happen. So I think that's a really important point. So conscious that I want to make sure we get to questions, but I just wanted to bring up around, as you mentioned, Jon, about the YouGov, if my slides will move, there you go, and tell us a bit more about this, because Epilepsy Action is now on this and wasn't previously. So I just, if you wanted to talk to this a bit more, because I think it's a great thing to be able to say.
Yeah, so for anybody who doesn't know the YouGov top 200 charities, this is a survey that YouGov do every quarter. And as far as I understand it, the way they do it is that they, like any other polling organisation, will contact a random number of people. And they won't prejudice the outcome by saying, have you heard about Macmillan, for example, but the question's more open. So it's a good way of measuring brand awareness and getting that external validation that what you're doing is actually doing, a job of raising the profile of your cause and your organization. So for us, we looked at this for years and sort of dreamt about how great it would be to get in there. But our ability to run national awareness campaigns, which is a really big ability to sort of push your way in terms of fame and popularity and making your cause feel seen. We weren't in a position to do it because, as mentioned, all the effort was on trying to get the foundations in place. So this year we've run two national awareness campaigns. The first one was digital first, trying to get millennials to be interested in epilepsy. And part of the reason for that is that, in fact, not millennials, Gen Z, sorry, is that Gen Z are really cause driven compared to millennials, baby boomers. So we wanted to sort of see whether we could develop a new supporter base within that group of people. And if you do the sort of deep dive onto this, you'll see that our millennial and Gen Z audience is actually stronger than our 150 position. People in that section really like us, and that campaign reached 1.75 million people. And then the second campaign that we did was our big out of home campaign, which people may have seen in poster sites around the UK, called Can I Count on You? That's reached well over 10 million people. So we would not have been able to run national awareness campaigns of that scale previously, just because the focus of my team, as I said, was on the tools rather than on the creative. So it's been a really good thing for us,
Yeah, it's fantastic. And yeah, those campaigns, you see them everywhere, which is fantastic to have that awareness. And I suppose, Marius, from your point as well, it must be such a great thing to be able to say that, you've been part of this, because the technology has been helping sort of support, the amazing work that the guys have been doing.
Absolutely. I mean, the technology is just the enablers, to be perfectly honest. I mean, there's what Jon and the team have done over the last 2-3 years using that base has been pretty remarkable, to be honest. So we're really, really proud of that. And yeah, I mean, we're looking forward to seeing what else they can do.
Absolutely. Right. So I'm going to run the last quick poll. So bear with me if I can get my computer to cooperate. So what we're asking really is, what is the biggest challenge that you are having on your single member and supporter view? Sorry, my computer does not want to cooperate with me. Okay. So if I just quickly launch that poll, and so sort of looking at the different options around either you've got insufficient or too many disparate systems, data quality issues, internal skills or resources, lack of strategy, knowing what to track or knowing where to start. So I'm just going to leave that up just for another second or two. And no surprise at the minute, what winning is the lack of strategy or knowing what to track, which I think nobody's surprised by. So let me end that poll and let me share the results. So yeah, so a bit of a mixed bag between the lack of strategy or knowing what to do, the skills and resources, always an issue, which Jon has kind of sort of touched on already, and the data quality and accuracy. So I think just to kind of also gives us now, as we go into kind of questions from the delegates, that sort of where people are. So I'm going to stop sharing, and then just before I do that, I'm just going to bring Alan back in quickly to do a quick wrap up on 5 tips. Alan.
Joyce. So these are, a collection of kind of 5 tips, and I think they probably resonate really well with what we've kind of already discussed, through this. But I think, if you can start with the data, and I think one of the things that we spoke about, in sort of preparation hasn't come up yet, but is just how Epilepsy Action kind of didn't go and build a spaceship to try and get, from point A to point B. they got from point A to point B, looked at what they needed, and then moved from point B to point C. So about that kind of journey. And I think there's a lot of flexibility built in there. There's a great story here about using a generic import tool to be able to report or to import any type of data rather than building really deep, highly integrated, data import models that could have been, perfect, but also quite limiting. So start with the data and make sure that you can adapt it. And so choosing tools that allow you to adapt, because as we've seen already through the stats and through Jon's story, things change and you need to be able to evolve with that. Another great takeaway from this particular case there, I think, is that strong foundations. So strong foundations in understanding how to use your data, having access to the data, having the data in the right format and structure can actually allow you to be more creative. Because as Jon said, people were then freed up to not be working on data and working on the system, but to look at it and go, here's something that's interesting. Maybe we can go and do that. And then you see the results of that. So great, opportunity to use good foundations to drive creativity. And I think, good tech enables good storytelling is a new sort of thing that I think we're going to see coming out, especially kind of through the adoption of AI. So another one, the kind of a quote that I love is evidence beats assumption. And that is data should challenge existing beliefs, rather than just kind of allow those existing beliefs to kind of carry on driving the narrative. Things evolve, things change. So do look at the data to understand how you can get better behavior, supportive behavior. Real-time reporting to transform your tactics. And again, this is about being able to be flexible and to adapt. So if you've got those insights, not just before you're running a campaign, but in the middle of a campaign, you can kind of look at what's working and what's not and tweak it. And we're living in a very modern world now where the tools that you might be using to run some of these campaigns allow you to do that. So you don't have to just wait to fire and forget and then wait for it to complete to see the results. You can actually interrogate, make some tweaks, make some changes, and using the right tools to be able to do that can even help to do that. And then really, I think, measure what matters. And to this point, there's a great spreadsheet that we will share that Jon uses for tracking conversion and optimization. And I think this is an incredibly useful asset to use. So we'll send this out in the post email to everybody on the call with the recording. But it's a great tool for you be able to input data and kind of just convert it and see it. So Jon's is very graciously provided it with some mock-up data that you can then use to see how you can measure and track performance with your send out later.
Perfect, thank you. Right, so gentlemen, I'm bringing you back in again. And just to say on the spreadsheet, yeah, it's a really useful tool. So thank you for sharing that with everybody. Okay, right, I'm going to do my pick and choosing questions. So questioning, when moving to dynamics, how did you balance the want for more data with cleaning the existing data from the old CRM? Going to you, Jon.
So the reality was, when we were in the project, it was very much about trying to get that data that we had in and check the quality. That was the kind of focus initially. Once we'd done that, the sort of big conversation that Marios and I had, where at the end of it, he probably felt quite relieved and I wanted to go and cry in a corner, led to the pivot into the second thing, which was how do you get better quality data? So the spreadsheet that Alan spoke about there was an attempt to understand how all the different things that we do, from social media work to website work to PR work to fundraising work to volunteering work, how all of that stuff ultimately ends up in service users wanting to give their data in all forms. So each individual organization will be different, I'm sure. But for us, the reason that's been quite useful is that by looking at that monthly, we can start to see, well, if we put all of our effort into, doing things that drive social media engagement, but put no thought into how we convert any of that into data, that isn't the right thing. Similarly, if we spend all of our time each month looking at how we optimize our website for collecting data, that isn't the right thing. So we've used that to have good conversations in terms of that data gathering piece since we've gone live, and also used it to look at the quality of that data as well. So as Alan was saying right at the beginning, expectation from people, whether they're receiving things from a charity or receiving things from Nike, are the same. People want to feel like the information they're receiving is personally relevant. So that ultimately comes back to the data that you capture initially. So, beginning of this year, we were capturing quite a lot of email addresses without any sense of connection. And now we know much more about what those connections are and what they've done with us, so we can tailor their experience moving forward.
Perfect. And which kind of ties into another question, which was the sort of the data improvement project run as a separate project post go live to the CRM project? So are you running a separate data improvement project? And Marius, I'm going to come to you on that as well to go, what's your thoughts on running a dedicated separate data improvement project while doing these kind of projects? Sorry, saying project a lot there. Jon.
So to start us off, in terms of that project around data improvement, it's been a bit of a journey. So as I mentioned, the original database that we had was someone's job. So when you get into the fact that the data wasn't the beautiful internal pieces of a pyramid, but a dead grandparent's attic, you do have to have a conversation about that person's performance, and you do have to think about whether you've got the right people supporting that person or the right role in place to be able to do that work moving forward. So we've gone through a couple of different processes to get where we are now, and it's still a work in progress. So one of the things for us, it's one of our charity values, our brand values, is around inclusivity, and we're not currently capturing enough the data in terms of diversity, so that's a big focus for us moving forward. So yeah, it's moved through a few people's hands, but it's become more of an organizational problem now rather than an individual problem.
Perfect. Marius, thoughts?
Well, I guess you can certainly look at things that you need to do post go live. I mean, it's there's obviously a number of things taken into account and how quickly you need to do it, and the sort of background to the project itself. But I guess you do need to think about it at the outset. So a couple of exercises, I guess, different exercises you can do is something like a perfect customer view, where you say, well, if I had the perfect profile, the perfect data against the customer, what would that look like? And then you kind of do a bit of a gap analysis. What are we missing? How are we going to get there? That type of thing. And then I guess, because typically what will happen is that in a project you go, well, we'll get around to that at some point. And then, unless you've got people driving things, which, like Epilepsy Action, for example, it might just get forgotten, left behind. So having that plan in advance, knowing what the objectives are, knowing what the gaps are, just then allows us to plan for it a little bit more in a more controlled way post go live if you need to.
Perfect. So this is quite a long question, so bear with me and I'll try and read it sensibly. I'm interested in how your engagement scores correlate to income. How did you create the criteria for your engagement scores? Is this exclusively linked to donations, or does it also score non-financial touch points? And does the scoring system ultimately seek to drive audiences through a funnel to increase financial support? You can also say, Jon, that there's a lot to unpick there, and I can't answer it all now. We can always line, but headline thoughts on that question.
Yeah, no problem. So it isn't just financial information, and part of the reason for that is that there is quite a lot of insight at the moment that suggests that the major source of a lot of charities' income, which is legacies, doesn't actually have a stronger connection to long-standing financial donations as people previously thought. So we've got things in there, like, as I said, like the amount of time people have volunteered for us, the amount of courses that they've done, the amount of times they've spoken to our helpline, because all of this stuff is stuff that might mean that somebody is really up against it in terms of their ability to give money to us on an ongoing basis, because you've got the cost of living challenges, and obviously for us, people with epilepsy often don't have incomes at all, or if they do, have very limited means. But then what you sometimes find is people 10, 20 years from now pass away and they leave us hundreds of thousands of pounds in their estate without having had any real previous financial data that would suggest they're about to do that. So it's a real mix of stuff for us. Ultimately, what we want is for people to feel a stronger connection to our cause. So if they're donating more of their time, more of their energy to us, that's a really strong indication that they are doing something that is of value.
Yeah, and I suppose, Marius, from your point, sort of thinking about that engagement scoring, is there any sort of key points that you think people really should think about when kind of going on that journey of thinking we're going to start using this?
might take a whole different session on its own, really.
Yeah, really
Pretty much.
there.
I mean, up until the AI popped its reared its head, engagement scoring was definitely the buzzword. And generally, every single engagement we had, the client would say, "Can we have some engagement scoring?" And then the first thing we'd say is, "Well, you know, what do you consider engagement?" And they go, "Ooh, we'll get back to you." So it is a little bit more complex. Obviously, Jon and the guys there have done something very specific to themselves, and even then, I guess, Jon, what you're saying is not perfect. You know, it's something to aim for, really. So yeah, it varies. It varies, I guess. There's lots and lots of things, but it does vary from charity to charity and from organisation to organisation.
Perfect, right. I'm going to squeeze in one more question and then I'm going to go back to Alan. So question for you, Jon, specifically, are you using click dimensions for your email marketing? So I suppose, what are you using around email marketing and how has that integration worked if you are using it?
Yep, so we are using click dimensions, and it is, you know, by being a platform specific product, very well integrated. So we can do quite sophisticated things there in terms of including and excluding people. It's, you know, I don't think any email marketing system is perfect. I think you're always making sacrifices in one place or another. It's not the most beautiful system in the world. There are a few quirks with it, but when I've compared the cost of getting a similar level of integration with another platform, so like HubSpot or .digital, the costs of doing that outweighed the usability benefit that we get from integrating those tools.
Perfect, thank you. Right, I'm going to bring Alan back in because I'm conscious of time. So Alan, get my slide to it. Alan, over to you.
Thanks, Joyce. As always, I like to kind of close these things on a quote. This is from a really well-known management consultant and kind of the father of quality improvement movement. And that is, without data, you're just another person with an opinion. And I'd sort of really encourage people to think about, you know, challenging those existing opinions that you have and look to the data to validate them, because you do have limited resources, both in terms of budget and time and focus. And so you really should look to the data. If you can't look to the data, then I think then start to look at why. And it isn't always about the system that you're on, but as we've seen, changing the system can force you to really get to grips with the data. And I think that the data is going to continue becoming more and more important, as Jon kind of, you know, alluded to. The kind of AI is kind of the next thing, but we really know that AI is really quite silly, really, without good data. So if anyone's thinking about, you know, data or any AI, then please think first about your data. So a couple of kind of closing points to take away from today. Success depends on knowing who your audience is before you decide to reach them. Look to turn your limited resources into focused, impactful activity. And data removes assumptions and supports confident decisions on investments and time. And you can use that data to go and get the budgets that you may need in terms of supporting it. So always start there. And a better data creates better, you know, more freedom. It frees up teams to be more creative, as we've seen today, and stop them from just being reactive to the next thing that happens. So to close it off, thank you very much to our guests, to Jon for sharing all of his experience and insights, and to Marios for being part of that project and for sharing your input from how a partner sees things. And I think we've seen a lot of honesty and truth here today, and I think that's really useful. So I thank our guests for that. I thank everybody on the call who joined us today as a delegate. I know your time is precious, so thank you very much for joining us. We will be sending out an email with the recordings. There is a link to a survey. Please do complete the survey. That tells us whether we've done a good job today or not, and allows us to improve. Hart Square does have an app, which has got great things like news and events. You can watch all the recordings from previous ones. And we have a great set of guides available on the app as well. So do download the app if you do get a chance to. And once again, thank you very much for joining us. And I think we're going to finish just on time.
Exactly. Yes. Thank you, everybody, for joining us, and hopefully see you on another webinar again soon.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.